Now, going on to number 6, we always read the prompt first whenever there is one available. And this one is asking us about the underlined portion of the text. And when you're being asked about the underlined portion, the first thing you should think of is that you really need the overall main idea. The underlined portion is only important in the way that it interacts with the overall main idea. So let's go ahead and get that main idea. This text is adapted from a novel. Israel is a young man wandering through New England in the 18th century. He hired himself out for 3 months. At the end of that time, to receive his wages, 200 acres of land. So someone was working, hiring himself out, and as his wages, he was going to get 200 acres of land. His employer proving false to the contract in the matter of the land, and there being no law in the country to force him to fulfill it. So the employer, after promising him that he was going to get land for the work he did, proved false. In other words, the employer said, hey, guess what? I'm not going to give you that land after all. Next part says, Israel, who, however brave-hearted and even much of a daredevil upon a pinch, seems nevertheless to have evinced throughout many parts of his career a singular patience and mildness. So there it says Israel actually tended to be a very brave-hearted and daredevil kind of person. But nevertheless, even though he was a very brave and courageous and adventurous person, nevertheless, sometimes he had to have patience and mildness. So really counterintuitive. You would think that someone would save the day by being a hero and grabbing a gun or a weapon or fighting the bully or whatever it is. But here it actually says this person had a natural tendency to be wild and crazy, but in order to get through this situation, he actually had to have patience and mildness. And as a result, he was obliged to look around for other means of livelihood than clearing out a farm for himself in the wilderness. So we have this entire story about this person who was promised some land. The employer ended up lying to him and not giving him the land. And so he had to look within for patience and calmness. And that allowed him to carefully think about something else he was going to do. And he looked around for other ways of livelihood, of supporting himself. So the underlined portion was the orange part, which says that he had to do something that was against his normal personality, which was to be brave-hearted and a daredevil. So let's look at the answers. Does it imply that he treasures a characteristic of his personality? We don't really see any commentary about him treasuring or valuing it. It was simply that he had that aspect to his personality. B, suggests that if not for a certain aspect of his character, he might not have been as easily thwarted in his ambition to establish a farm. That might be right. It says there's a certain aspect of his character, the mildness and the patience. And if it weren't for that, he might not have been as easily thwarted. In other words, it's because of that patience and mildness that he was able to resist being thwarted. And thwarted is if you're being overcome. And so he was about to be defeated, but he had some aspects of his character. So that's very hard to understand, but it could be perfect. And C, it shows why he would not have been able to undertake the enormous amount of labor. It wasn't about the enormous labor he undertook. It was about how he had to look within to be calm, even though he's not naturally that way. And D, it explains why, when the situation requires it, he's able to undertake courageous acts that others would generally avoid. That one would be more common sense, would make a lot more sense, but it's actually the opposite. He's normally that way. And the orange part explained that he had to actually put that away and be more calm for a little while in order to succeed in this situation. So the only answer that even comes close to being right here is B.